Zeuhl Wortz mechanic. The musicians singing celestial music. Magma is a monolith of French music, but they do not sing in French. How can a main band of French progressive rock, or called a main band of French progressive rock, and an innovator of French sound not even sing in French? Magma sings in Kobaian, the invented language of the planet Kobaia, the future tongue of a new humanity. By that sentence, one can understand how absolutely unprecedented Magma is in music even beyond French music tastes. Today, Magma is often hailed as the master or final boss of progressive rock, despite the fact the band has never considered themselves to be part of progressive rock. Everything, though, can be and is progressive in Magma's music structure, even the snarling Germanic-esque lyrics. Magma exalts this concept. They proclaim it Zeuhl, or Zeuhl, forgive pronunciation. Zeuhl, the music of celestial Kobaia, the rendering of this Kobaian mythology to song. Zeuhl is the musical philosophy that makes up Magma. In bandleader Christian Vander's terms, Zeuhl can roughly be translated as celestial music, but it is best to think of it as a dynamic concept that transcends both music and lyrics. This musical universe is the future soundscape of humanity inspired by John Coltrane, the bones of jazz overlaid with no end of progressive rock, neoclassical, and pseudo-Slavic Germanic hymns. Zeuhl is the heat of creativity constantly flowing through the universe. Zeuhl is bandleader and founder Christian Vander's personality. If there is one constant in Magma's flux, it is Vander. Throughout the group's 50-year-plus history, Christian Vander has always been Magma. He, often accompanied by former wife Stella, is the mastermind behind the decades-long epic of Magma. The band has a history and story that can match the rise and fall of civilizations. Vander has spent years speaking the band's pseudo-constructed language, charting massive musical sequences, then producing the expansive space opera that fills the band's discography. Christian Vander's drumming is the soul of the band, and anyone can hear it. Nobody can contain him, and that is what makes Magma so rapid and so cultic. As bandmate Stella Vander describes him, "You know, Christian is very tiring for people, because he has an idea every 5 minutes." Proclaim then, Verda ita, or Earth is dead, for it is time to journey across the stars. With unrelenting drumming and ecstatic male falsetto, Vander embodies musical philosophy in Magma. The name Magma is not a coincidence either. The heat and passion is what fuels Christian Vander. Before taking up drums, his earliest musical memories in childhood involved heating his tambourine to make music for battles between cowboy and Indian toys in his bedroom. Scenes of imagined conflict, which were probably the earliest seeds for the mythic concept of Magma. To Vander, music is a physical force and should be performed as such. It is a constant pressure and sonic relief which is meant to be engaged with, not used for easy listening in the background. His entire performance is radical. Outsiders to Magma may find it strange that Christian Vander's roots are in jazz, American jazz to be exact. Vander spent his early life around American musical expats in France, which led the young Vander to take John Coltrane as his idol. Idol is not an exaggeration with his admiration of Coltrane either. He credits John Coltrane's albums for teaching him more about music than anything else. He has said he doesn't even listen to much else besides jazz, and rarely listens to music in general. Vander's first exposure to progressive rock came from being hired to play it in a band. Magma came into existence due to John Coltrane's death and Vander's suicidal bender in Italy after hearing the news about his passing. As he observed on his musical direction after the jazz icon's death, "The year John Coltrane died, it seemed to me that afterwards, it was as though music had to try to start all over again. Someone had to pick up the pieces, go on searching in the way that he had." Magma embodied a picking up of those pieces in Vander's vision. The name Magma itself, well named after Magma, did not originate directly from the word. The name comes from the song Nogama, or Nogama, Vander had written while part of the Les Woordelarks from 1964 to 1965, a predecessor to Magma. Vander has stated he reached the name Magma by repeating the title Nogama to himself until it corrupted into Magma. He was drawn to it by the heat and flexibility. The metaphor of magma would retain a special meaning for the band due to its creative flow. The legend of Kobaia was born out of this effort of intense creativity. It was an incendiary idea that had to exist by Vander or by someone else. A timeline of Magma's members resembles a history of civilizations. Early on, Magma was often compared to a cult, with Christian Vander as its cryptic headmaster. The band supposedly being formed by Vander, Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, and Francis Mose after being fired as a backing group for a never-named French pop star. What drew people in was the band's performance. Insane chanting to stoic hymns, the iconic vocal range, intense drumming, then the total control of the music. This mastery was a volcanic crucible on Magma's members. There's nothing funny, ironic, or tongue-in-cheek about Magma. While the sound is occasionally playful and lighthearted, the band is dead serious. Clothing themselves in Vander's symbols, stories, and style, Magma developed an identifiable look. During the band's prime in the 1970s, Magma was putting on 3 to 5 hour shows 5 times a week across France, often literally playing themselves to exhaustion. The band regularly staying at fans' houses for free just to turn a livable profit. The massive length was necessary to get across all the still developing material and songs. Magma's audience would watch enraptured as the band worked through hours of material in an alien language while dressed in alternate clothing occasionally. People adorned in Magma iconography designed by Vander, singers shouting in tongues, and the performance turned into an orchestral spectacle. That iconic solar symbol that resembles a bird connecting Magma to the ideal of life. Magma looked like a cult from the outside, and their popularity definitely was cultic. There was an apocalyptic intent which drove the lyrics towards a greater goal. The story of Kobaia, described in Kobaian in Magma's lyrics, was born from Christian Vander's fears of an ecological collapse, as he termed it. Though Vander admits the band has drifted away from that impetus, he says it is still bad, but a majority of Magma's material has been with Vander since the 1970s. The band's latest album, Zest, in 2019, has been in development since at least the mid-1970s as a concept. Other elements of Magma albums, lyrics and musical structure, have been under development since the late 1960s. The band workshops concepts in live performance, so motifs and ideas can emerge, disappear, then be reinvented over literal decades. There are also elements which never rise beyond the developmental stage. All exist in the pursuit to describe the emotional state of Zeuhl, or the celestial music, which animates the band. It coheres in the tales of humanity and the planet Kobaia, an imagined utopia, or as described by Vander, Earth without the stupid people, a quote he attributes to Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. The Kobaian concept is immersion, and immense. The players sing in Vander's emotional spirit language, and are often credited with Kobaian names. Christian Vander, for example, is sometimes billed on album as Zeben Strain de Gusta. Magma, the band, acts as bards for Magma, the story, telling of the origins, struggles, and sadness of the people of Earth and Kobaia. It is what drives Kobaian philosophy to exalt the Univeria Zekt, or universal man, an innate desire to strive for utopia, perfection, and harmony in the individual, but it too is equally Nietzschean, dealing in fatalism, struggle, and the abyss. It animates Kobaians towards the unknowable goal, and Kobaians here can mean both those in the story and the listeners. It is ancient human conflict told in an alien tongue. It is not an empty gesture. The band strikes at primeval impulses, but those set among the stars. Zeuhl, or the Zeuhl Wortz, or the celestial music, sets the tone. Whereas Kobaian is an alien tongue, Zeuhl is an alien music, but both derived from modern humanity. What would music sound like in 1,000 years on another planet? Zeuhl tries to answer that. It may feel foreign, even unsettling, but the music's meaning is without end. Zeuhl's influences are Vander's, so the intent was inspired by John Coltrane, but it also resembles the German composer Karl Orff. Jazz, neoclassicalism, Romanticism, art metal, modernism, and even fusionism are all identifiable components of it. Magma can switch between prog rock, metal hymns, and folk-like chants all in one song. Vocals are not set apart from the music in Zeuhl. Vocals are another instrument which is constructed in unison with the entire symphony. A Magma song is one whole unit within itself. As Vander has stated, Magma is not rock music. It simply is music. Kobaian as a language and tool is robust. Christian Vander's original purpose for creating the language, or maybe using it is a better term, was because he wanted to express musically what no other language could. The pseudo-constructed language probably originates from Vander hearing his grandparents speak German and Polish, as it does sound German and Slavic, though some say it sounds Japanese or even resembles Hungarian. The intention behind Kobaian is to be a healing language that arises naturally, which is why it sounds like speaking in tongues. It's not a grammatical language like modern tongues, but an emotional one that arises from the soul. When written down, Kobaian is rendered with diacritics akin to German. These are mostly for stylization and, usually, do not affect direct pronunciation. These diacritical markings do have meaning, but it is musical inflection instead of direct pronunciation. They do not imply the same tones or sounds they would in English, German, Spanish, or any modern language. Vander has said Zeuhl, Magma, and Kobaian is in no way really French either. In straight pronunciation, which is impossible without music, Kobaian resembles something like Frenchified Latin flavored with German. The markings simply denote texture for the players during a performance. There is a logic to Kobaian, but no real grammar. Vander often records himself singing it to interpret it while working on lyrics. There too are associations between words and concepts in the language, but not exactly. Certain words reemerge throughout Magma's discography due to emotional associations, so their meaning can be guessed to a degree. Important words may be of French or English origin. A rendering of Hallelujah, for example, appears in Kobaian and retains its modern religious meaning. While Kobaian has implicit meaning to the singers, its utilitarian purpose in Magma is to allow a sort of multi-person impulse scatting. Kobaian can express sounds that are not there in French, English, or German. Kobaian then can be half interpreted and half not, making it a fascinating component of Zeuhl music. It forces lyrics and vocals to become another instrument in the weaving texture of the song. The greater story of Magma is presented in Kobaian, which is only semi-decipherable due to dedicated fans. Even then, French still presents a partial language barrier. That issue is made more confusing because the story of the albums does not exist in chronological order, nor is it clear if there is an intended sequence to them. The story of Kobaia may be based on emotion and spirit, as its language is. Notes and interviews with the band have helped, but Christian Vander's interpretation of the story and his own material is constantly changing as a musician. As he says, well, this could be both ways because usually Magma always plays on stage before recording. Almost all Magma albums were recorded a long time after he tried it on stage, in many different ways with many different changes. Unnecessary disclaimer then. Magma's material is highly dependent on personal interpretation. It is the story of Kobaia and the Zeuhl Wortz, a space opera told about the future in an almost indecipherable lingot. Magma is sci-fi, but it is also not. Christian Vander has said the story of Kobaia could take place anywhere or any time, as in every time, in every place, the deeds of men remain the same. It is metaphorical, but it is also about utopia, creativity, war, genocide, the fallibility of humanity, alien invasions, and an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. All normal things in Magma. The band commenced with the 1970 self-titled album, Magma, 1970. The cover depicts people being trampled underfoot by a great consuming beast, a symbolic representation of what leads the first soon-to-be Kobaians to flee for the freedom of space. One theory suggesting they are from an Eastern European dictatorship on a ruined Earth, which is why Kobaian sounds so Germanic, Slavic. The philosophy of Zeuhl has taken root there due to a mysterious prophet, but, like the band, it is not yet fully developed. As this later introduction guided people into the story of Magma, Earth, this concerns you. Your systems crush and your revolts assassinate. Actually, you destroy what you don't understand. We know that you too will be destroyed. Our music witnesses to the beauty that you want to ignore, and to our hatred of your accursed evolution. Beyond space and time, a planet, Kobaia, awaits us. We have known this world since the day we opened our eyes, millions of years ago. If only all those suffocating down here could follow us. Only the hypocrite has no hopes. Earth, you are now only oblivion. Magma's 1970 premiere album had not yet defined Magma's distinctive texture, so it resembles jazz more than Zeuhl. The Kobaian is there, but also not yet fully developed. Examining the song titles of the album, these early ones lack the subtlety of later matured Magma. This shows the divide between early and later Zeuhl music. Early Zeuhl sees language/Kobaian as simply an aesthetic element in the music. Later Zeuhl sees it as a conceptual language to be developed in tandem with the music. The first song even using an intro in English. That sets the scene for the concept of the album. Later songs develop on the jazz sound with folk and classical influence. The opening of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré even sounds like a sort of Elysian folk ballad. It may strike one as disorienting with the more boisterous, militaristic sound of Magma later developed, but there is little extreme about Magma in 1970 besides some fascistic screaming. But no real militaristic choirs or hymns from the angels yet. It is the jazzy start of the journey to Kobaia. Magma, 1970, was divided into two parts, Journey and Discovery. Journey concerns the flight of the Kobaians from Earth, then Discovery about the settling of the planet Kobaia. Journey reflects on Earth falling into decay due to insatiable greed, which destroys all honor and creativity on the planet. The opening prophecy of Kobaia invites everyone to come along to distant Kobaia, a utopia imagined among the stars. Abused and suppressed by authorities on Earth, those who will become the Kobaians flee for the stars aboard a spaceship. They suffer both a nostalgia for their homeland, but also a strong hatred for those who control it. After the threats of space, a poisonous planet they name Malaria, the Kobaians find Kobaia, or the Celestial Planet. This leads into Discovery as the Kobaian civilization develops into a utopia due to their celestial philosophy, now unchained from the binds and heavy past of Earth. It is a utopia intended to live in harmony with the universe. Seeing the fruits of their own philosophy, the Kobaians decide to return to Earth after innumerable years to spread their splendor, Stoa and Mu being the principles of harmony which guide the Kobaians. This, though, once again puts them under threat of Earth's authorities and retribution. This brings about 1001 degrees centigrade, the surfacing of Magma's heat motifs and friction between Earth and Kobaia. Magma's 1971 sophomore album concerns the intensity and heat of the creative process as Kobaia bursts forth to the surface. The core of the music of this album is still based on jazz, but Kobaian vocals begin to take prominence here as a robust instrument. Experimentation is expanding. A lot of chanting emerges on this album along with horns and piano riffs. It is a bit divided as it begins to gesture towards something new. The horns, chanting, and piano riffs emphasizing the rift between the peoples of both Earth and Kobaia, their relations strained and distant. Magma's sound is evolving due to changing players, still absent female vocals here, but it begins to heat up into something truly unique. This is Zeuhl being tempered in a furnace. 1001 degrees centigrades, or Magma 2, or 1001 degrees centigrades, is split between two sides. The first is by Christian Vander, and the second divided between contributions between Teddy Lasserie and Francois KÖHRMAHN. This gives the album a division in sound. Vander's contributions focus on the adventures of the Kobaian Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. At 21 minutes in length, this song is much heavier than the first album and foreshadows the direction Vander would take the band in. Is lansi doya en ki ia o liak, or more reminiscent of the first album. That is not surprising, as keyboardist Francois KÖHRMAHN would leave Magma to found the fellow Zeuhl band Zeuhl, germinating the celestial genre across France and contributing to its growing history. The story of the album resumes with a Kobaian envoy to Earth. They bring with them Earth astronauts who are stranded in space as a sign of goodwill to the planet. After generations, Earth has degraded greatly, but the people welcome their celestial cousins. Interest builds in the advanced technology of Kobaia, but when the Kobaians begin to speak of their Univeria Zekt, Earth imprisons the envoys. With bluster, Earth begins to blindly provoke distant Kobaia. Trading insults, Kobaia threatens Earth with their ultimate weapon unless the diplomats are released. Under a threat they cannot compare to, Earth agrees, but an agreement is signed which forbids interaction between the two societies. Rejecting the Kobaians, and Kobaia, and the Zeuhl Wortz, Earth's leaders have damned the planet to its fate. Still, the celestial philosophy begins to take hold among the people. Magma, 1970, and 1001 degrees centigrades, 1971, represent the first arc of Magma. Magma, the band, then entered upon the Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, the time of hatred in Kobaian, a 3-album epic about the fate of Earth post-Kobaian contact. The chaos of religious upheaval and revelation begins to grip the soul of Earth and its people. The strange thing, the cycle's 3rd movement and its conclusion is Magma's 3rd studio album, Mechanic Destructive Commando, Movement of Destroyer Commando Squad in Kobaian, from 1973. The conclusion of the Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré was released as the band's 3rd album. Mechanic Destructive Commando, or MDK, would come to define Magma after release, but the 3 movements of the cycle were only standardized on the live album Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré in 2001. Their history and connections then can be somewhat confusing. The following then will veer from release dates to the assumed chronological order of the albums, as to place them in context of Magma's story and philosophy. The first motion of the Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré cycle is the eponymously named Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, or Time of Hatred. Of all the cycle's components, it has to have the most troubled history, and that is saying something for a Magma album. In release, the Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré songs have often been tagged onto other albums. A version, derived from mid-1970s performances, saw release on Disc 2 of the live album Retrospective Parts 1 and 2, alongside Mechanic Destructive Commando in 1980. Here, it was presented as one unified symphony broken into 2 parts instead of its own album. Outside bootlegs, which are many, the Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, as a unified singular piece, would only be standardized for release on the 2001 live album. This means the opening album of the cycle does not exist as a true studio album, yet. The album Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, then, is a pseudo-appendage which has been scattered about Magma's discography. There is no definite version of it, but some believe certain performances of it are superior to others. It's really a personal opinion if one prefers the retrospective version or another live edition. There then is no definite version of a Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, but a composite can be glanced from the renditions. Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré's sound reflects its pseudo-album nature, but it is foreboding, a prelude building up towards conflict. Magma always excels at that. On Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, instruments are discordant, vocals barked in unison, and solos isolated, the anxiety of a coming war and the rumors which precede it. Whereas the rest of the trilogy sounds militaristic with a jazz bend, Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré sounds like a warning horn before the destruction. It is an entrance to the time of hatred towards the death of Earth. Much like the music, the story is a component of that time of hatred. The celestial music of the Kobaians remains popular among the peoples of Earth. This philosophy has become nothing less than subversive. An uprising of arms, or thought, against the authorities of Earth brings chaos to the planet. Crackdowns upon the populace in general commence as Earth seeks to snuff out the celestial music. From this destruction arises a prophet, a radical advocate of his own Zeuhl Wortz, the struggle for the Univeria Zekt. He declares the people must embrace the supreme being of the universe, the KREUHN, creativity embodied, and become the universal man. To the decayed Earth, he offers 2 options: conversion by word or conversion by sword. It is clear a holy war will soon commence across Earth, as that prophet, Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, and his followers become a target for hatred. There, it is declared, Verda Ita, or Earth is dead, to the populace. Verda Ita, 1974, would become the second motion in the Time of Hatred, but it, bizarrely enough, did not first appear as a Magma album. Verda Ita was originally released, and used as, the soundtrack for the 1972 avant-garde French film Tristan et Isolde, Tristan and Isolde, which Christian Vander composed for. Its release then was varied. It was first released as the film's LP in 1974, re-released as a Christian Vander LP with Magma branding, still as Tristan and Isolde, in 1978, then re-recorded in 1989 as Magma official Verda Ita, 1989. The 4 musicians on it were Magma regulars Christian Vander, Stella Vander, Janek Top, and Klaus Blasquez. Verda Ita is hard to place on a spectrum. That may be due to its unique stripped-down origins as a film soundtrack. Most would regard Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré as a sort of musical prototype for the much more famous Mechanic Destructive Commando. The similarity in pacing is there, but Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré is stripped down due to the small number of musicians on it. It also indulges more in singular vocals rather than heavy choirs. It was released after Commando, but also feels like a test run for Commando. The album is an isolated voice against the Bane Mass. As the album name suggests, the prophet Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré pronounces Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, or Earth is dead, to the people of the planet. The collapse of Earth has come as its people ignored the warnings of the Kobaians. People still refuse the radicalism of the prophet, which may be mass suicide on a genocidal, if not omnicidal, scale. All those of Earth who reject the path to the Univeria Zekt declare their plan to march against the prophet. Under threat of slaughter, the prophet's followers betray him and join the march against Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. All of Earth is turned against Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré and his promise of the Univeria Zekt. The prophet stands alone with the Zeuhl Wortz. Listeners, though, will learn KREUHN or the Supreme Being is Infinite. Mechanic Destructive Commando, 1973, is the final act of the Du Samtok, regarded as Magma's masterpiece. The three words are a bold statement. Mechanic Destructive Commando. And they are supposed to be pronounced like that. Mechanic Destructive Commando. The Teutonic classical style and militant marching reached their maximum here. It is a true taste of futuristic warfare fueled by zealotry. Christian Vander's mad screaming at the head of the band, female choirs, and Janek Top's masterful bass run through the entire conclusion. The prophesized time of hatred has come to fulfillment. The warnings will prove true. Earth will be destroyed for its haughtiness. Under wars of ruin and pain of death, the people of Earth march against Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré and his insurgent creed. His message rejected, the prophet stands alone against the world. Though, as the armies march, a miracle occurs. A single individual calls out, "Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré," or, "I have seen the angel of light." Through the prophet or the celestial music, the angel smiles upon them. This person has been converted. The convert tells the truth spoken of by Da Zeuhl Wortz Mechanic, or the musicians singing celestial music. Doubt is sowed among the militants by the beauty of the music, and soon the armies of Earth collapse. Luck, or fate, or creativity is on the prophet's side. His ranks swell until the entire Earth is converted by the Zeuhl Wortz. The people proclaim in triumphant celebration, KREUHN or the Supreme Being is Infinite. Through the way of the Univeria Zekt, the prophet Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré leads the people of Earth into unity with the KÖHRMAHN. What exactly this means, though, is unclear. They either transcend, commit mass suicide, or are wiped out as Earth has been rendered to ash. But the celestial music continues. Christian Vander has called the conclusion of MDK a sort of timeless celestial funeral march, a mourning for the people. For now, the weapons are put away, and there is only the Zeuhl Wortz. The period of Hus Amtok is closed. Magma would follow MDK and Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré with Kontorkos in 1974. Kontorkos will have to be skipped over for now, but will be returned to later. It would become part of its own complex cycle within the Magma mythos. Magma would return to celestial Kobaia with 1976's Udu Wudu. It opens the Orc trilogy/duology, or the De Futura cycle of Magma. While still Zeuhl, the Orc trilogy shows Magma can do much more with the flexible concept of Zeuhl. That can involve anything from brief gospel interludes to a tribute to John Coltrane in Kobaian, to even singing in French. The slide into these elements also coincided with a more abstract sound, or maybe a standardized return to an earlier Magma sound. Udu Wudu is often demeaned as a slide into a more typical rock or prog approach, but it still retained the stylings of Kobaian. The militaristic marches made famous in Mechanic Destructive Commando, though, are largely not present here. By all regards, Udu Wudu is the most orthodox sounding Zeuhl album by Magma. A common theme of the Orc trilogy, Udu Wudu, Attack, and Mercy all sound almost mainstream. almost. Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré is an album where lighter themes and motifs from Magma's earlier period are polished off. Elements that would show up again decades later also begin here, like the song Zombies or Ghost Dance. Through the frantic opening of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, it is learned, well at peace, the people of Kobaia are once again under threat. In the celestial music, they learn of the trolls, or the people of Orc. Their exact nature is difficult to interpret, like most of the album, but the trolls are everything the Kobaians are not, both totally alien and opposite to them. The people of Orc are indestructible and are to machines as machines are to us. A cryptic statement used to display how absolutely alien these trolls of Orc are. Whereas the philosophy of Kobaia is in music, the philosophy of Orc appears to be in dance, as in the Trollerdans, Trolls Dance. In war, the people of Orc are like zombies as they wage a ghost dance against Kobaia, and perhaps Earth as well. Their war is one of total obliteration. Their weapons useless against the overwhelming trolls, the war starts badly for the Kobaians. That is until they commence De Futura, originally titled De Futura Hiroshima by Janek Top. One of Magma's most cerebral songs, which uses strings and guttural chanting to progress a war through time itself. The original title encapsulates the destructive fallout. As the introduction to De Futura states, the people of Orc surround us, but we can't see them. These people are a type of being whose relation to machines is like that which machines have to us. Only a voyage through time enables us to see these beings. De Futura is the story of this voyage through time, a voyage which shows us how to stop the illusory movement of passing time which prevents us from seeing. This voyage is a magical and enchanting one. Of course, this is on the condition that one really wished to live this adventure, to preserve in it and to let it carry one away. Behind the apparent harshness of this music, all is silence. This may also give an Egyptian pharaoh a vision of the far future, but that will come later. The De Futura cycle, or Orc cycle, concludes with the 1978 album Attack, a conclusion that boldly states on the tagline, "No surrender." With a cover by the equally alien H.R. Giger, the album depicts two bloated Giger-esque creatures, or the featured duo of the album, Orogon and Gorgo, a pair of twins or doppelgangers who may be of the people of Orc. Either way, their metallic and mechanical features suggest they are part of the mechanical race that antagonizes Kobaia and humanity. The sound of Attack reflects a conflict, the clash of cosmic music and troll dance, the last 7 minutes specifically showing a countdown to the end of the war. Being the last album of Magma's first tenure, it is a common accusation that Attack reflects Vander's fading interest in the Magma concept by the late 1970s. The most common criticism is that the album is front-loaded with less going on in the second half of the album. Attack does show a disinterest in Magma's established sound, to a degree, but it more or less continues the drift started with Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. Attack is inoculated with strains of gospel and spiritual, totally divorced from the earlier militaristic sound of Zeuhl. Military marches here are replaced by fervor and acclaim of church choirs. The militarism of the past is sublimated into religious fervor and wild dance. Will war or peace grip Kobaia and Orc? Attack's story picks up where the time-traveling warfare of De Futura from Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré ended. As shown by the heavy focus on a church sound, the war has brought a mass spiritual awakening across the cosmos. War fever grips Kobaia, but the struggle is long and indecisive. On distant Orc, from the conflict, arises two heroes, Orogon and Gorgo. Their exact relationship is unclear, as beings of Orc, but they seem to thematically mirror Kobaia and Orc as twins. Their story runs throughout the album. This is a clash of the Kobaians' natural state and the people of Orc's mechanical state. The clash of sound shows this is a war of both nature and culture. The title Attack being indicative of the word attack in English. The song Mat has a lot of non-Kobaian sounding speech in the background, which suggests the people of Orc feature heavily in the overall movement of the album. Though, as Dundai, To an Eternal Love is a love song, this suggests the war between Kobaia and Orc ends in some form of peace, though an unusual piece of the Zeuhl Wortz. As they are referred to as heroes on album, it can be assumed Orogon and Gorgo bring peace to the universe, as Dondai, To an Eternal Love, appears to be a reinterpretation of Imasuri Dondai, I Have Seen the Angel of Light, the war ends also due to a witness of beauty. The people of Orc and Kobaia are united in mutual appreciation of song and dance in the universe. There is a cosmic order to both. The final song, Nono, is a hymn of peace which restores beauty. Thus, the war concludes, and so does Magma's first official tenure by 1984. Wait, if the war is over, what is Mercy, then? Mercy is Magma's curious black sheep. The album Mercy is the stepchild of Magma's discography. There is a noticeable gap of 6 years between Attack, 1978, and Mercy, 1984, which reflects the drift inherent in Mercy's style. Mercy is both tonally and totally different for being such a normal album in regards to Magma's other albums. Here is the first pronounced use of sustained French and English in Magma, a more commonplace jazz style, and perhaps another gesture at mainstream appeal down a different avenue. One could go as far as to say Mercy removed any remnant rock element from the Magma sound to return to jazz roots, progressive rock always being somewhat of a foreign element to Christian Vander's style. Hearing a Magma album open with an almost pop-style ballad in English, like Call from the Dark, is odd. As is obvious, Mercy is the most controversial album in the entire Magma discography due to these attempts to return to a more bare, soulful jazz style. Mercy still does possess Magma's complexity, as it appears Vander can never shake his affinity for the grandiose or his kinship with Carl Orff. But Mercy continues this shift towards a barer jazz style that had started with Uru Uru. Many brash elements, like horns, that were tested on Uru Uru resurface in Mercy in a finer tuned form. As said, Call from the Dark is a sort of ballad. Do the Music can be best described as a Kobaian song rendered in English. Otis is a soulful French tribute to Otis Redding. I Must Return seems to be Vander's tribute to Magma in itself, or at least his musical philosophy. Eliphas Levi is a tribute to the French esotericist Alphonse Constant, otherwise known as Eliphas Levi. Then, The Night We Died is a dirge to the closure of Magma's first chapter. For now, that is. There was a transformation that needed to occur first, before the metamorphosis. Mercy is listed as jazz funk, but it's jazz funk infused with all the vitality of Magma's usual obsessions and ideals. It is kaleidoscopic in interest, but stands outside Magma's usual body of work in normal subject matter. Mercy was Vander segueing from Magma into a second band/side project, Offering, which the cover of Mercy somewhat alludes to. Offering was a side project by Vander dedicated to the memory of John Coltrane. That is why Mercy has such a jazz-infused brass sound that can be traced back to Coltrane's musical lineage. It's a literal offering to John Coltrane. Offering would continue the sounds first explored in Mercy, then branch off from Magma's roots. Magma was technically disbanded post-Mercy in 1984, but its major elements developed into Offering. That was due to both the band seeing a lack of work in the 1980s and its members wanting to head in new musical directions, especially Christian Vander. Offering's output was a passion project offering to his own musical influences. As Magma explores Vander's mind, Offering explored his soul. Offering would dominate his attention for most of the late 80s and 90s. Offering's albums will have to be glanced over here, because it is a Magma video, but anyone who enjoys Magma's jazzier side will relish them with songs like Love in the Darkness and the spiritual menagerie of Afi. These albums are not as confrontational as Magma's famous material, but Kobaian is used in them for both utilitarian purposes and as Vander's own musical trademark. The three released Offering albums are Offering Part 1/Part 2, 1986, Offering Part 3/Part 4, 1990, and Afi, or maybe Afi, 1993. The major issue many critics have with Offering overall is, despite being only 3 albums, the material offered often becomes unfocused. It never maintained a central concept or core like Magma to drive it. It was partially Vander refusing to be confined to Magma. Songs like Love in the Darkness retain an interest in long sequences and even Magma-style scatting. It is an excellent patchwork of Vander's varied jazz/soul influences, like Coltrane, but the best way to divide Offering and Magma is that Magma is Magma and Offering is Christian Vander. Offering is considered a post-Magma project, but it was always associated with its origins in Mercy and Magma to some extent, sometimes even being labeled with the phrase Magma Presents on album. The interlude of Offering was part of Magma's evolution. As is obvious by the Kobaian title of Offering's third album, Afi, interest in Magma was returning by 1993-1994. It seemed the group could put off Magma, but never escape it. After a break of about 12 years, Magma returned to the past and future in 1996 to commence the unpronounceable Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré trilogy. They truly did return to the past, future, and de futura too. Magma sees concurrent evolution in both time, space, and space-time, so things get complicated here, and, most of all, abstract. Magma's new period would not only offer new sounds, but new complications to the band's material overall. Released in 1974, Kontorkos, or Kontorkos, was originally seen as embodying part of the original Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré story, but was also linked to Ulu Ulu through De Futura. Release order makes it appear that Kontorkos is a prequel to Ulu Ulu and Attack, but upon Magma's return in the 1990s, the album was recontextualized as the central movement of the Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré trilogy, binding together the two characters of Kontorkos and Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. Because Magma's Magma, the album serves both these roles in theme, and does so musically as well. Through the lens of De Futura, it is both the Kobaians and listener looking through time into the past to discover the story of the scholar Kontorkos, or Kontark depending on version. The Oz or Os at the end may just indicate a story or saga, and his vision of the ancient pharaoh Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré or Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. The pronunciation on his title is not always clear. The two figures of this cycle, the scholar and pharaoh, will come to parallel one another in role, power, and their influence on the Zeuhl Wortz. The release of K.A., Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré in 2004 was not so much new songs as it was a standardization of older material for Magma, this time being from the original Kontorkos period of 1973-1974. In truth, most of the trilogy was already written by the mid-1970s, as Kontorkos was released in 1974. Reprises of both De Futura and Zombies surface throughout the trilogy. Early versions of Kontorkos and Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré appeared on Disc 1 of Magma's 1975 live album, Live/Hi, as Kontark, Part 1 and 2, and Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré Announcement, spelled slightly different here, and a version called Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré was also in circulation. Vander has referred to Kontark as an unfinished version of Kontorkos, with the colors somewhat there, so it just needed some filling in. The change in name reflects how the concepts evolved over time. The material undergoes constant evolution. The trilogy of K.A., Kontorkos, and Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré represent a thematic trilogy of inspiration/discovery, truth/dissent, and revelation/understanding, a sort of triptych which binds past, present, and future. By the Kobaian title alone, K.A. 2004, serves as a prequel to the story of Kontorkos. The word anteria here purposely resembles the word anterior, or that which comes before, like a prequel. It is here the scholar-archaeologist Kontorkos, or Kontark, as he is known in Kobaian, discovers and is drawn towards the Egyptian pharaoh Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré's tomb. The anteria, or anterior, to Kontorkos anteria is literal in sound and story. Through a foreshadowing of the celestial music, as shown by recurrent riffs, Kontark, or Kontorkos, is brought to the anterior of the tomb. There is a revelation which awaits him within. Kontorkos will become the conduit of the Zeuhl Wortz. It is hard to find any element of Magma which is not revived in the menagerie of Kontorkos anteria. In a unique turn for Magma, guitars take the foreground for the three movements of K.A. 1, 2, and 3. Each one mirrors the archaeologist's own excitement at the discovery, hesitation at his entrance, and concludes with contact to another time. K.A. 1 opens the album with hot anticipation and voices and piano driving the sound forward with a desire for revelation. In otherworldly meditation, choirs of the universe repeat the name Kontorkos, or sometimes heard as Kontorkos. This figure very much shares Christian Vander's own interest in the mysteries of ancient Egypt. Refrains which exalt Kobaia and glory during K.A. 2 give a majority of the album a sort of call and response nature leading towards the meeting of Kontorkos and the pharaoh. Kontorkos being played by Antoine Paganotti, and Vander lending his voice to the foreboding soul of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. This turns more ominous for KA3 as Kontorkos descends to the heart of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré's tomb. It is there he will find his sarcophagus and his revelation. As Peter Thelen described the themes of Kontorkos that mixed space, ancient Egypt, and revelation and death, Kontorkos is a man who discovers an old Egyptian tomb of an ancient master, murdered before reaching his aim, which was immortality. When he enters the tomb, he has a vision of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, and all of his secrets are then revealed to Kontorkos. To elaborate on that, it appears Kontorkos/Kontork is a prophet chosen by fate, or the universe, or the Zeuhl Wortz, embodied in the ancient Egyptian creator god Ptah, to become a prophet. He will bear the truth of the Zeuhl Wortz and become a predecessor to those who will flee to Kobaia. Driven by fate or the Zeuhl Wortz, Kontorkos discovers the tomb of the aeons dead pharaoh Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, a scholar and mystic who, like him, embarked on a similar quest at the beginning of history. The archaeologist either comes under the influence of the pharaoh or literally meets his ghost, which, depending upon interpretation, shows him a vision of the future, or maybe he simply remembers the future. It is there the story of the Kontorkos trilogy ties into the events of Orc in De Futura. Kontorkos sees all things already spoken of in the Kobaian mythology: the ruin of Earth, the beauty of Kobaia, the celestial march, the people of Orc, and the entire universe unto its end, or the performance of Zes. As the album concludes on shouts of Alleluia, Hallelujah in Kobaian, Kontorkos knows he must succeed where the pharaoh Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré failed long, long ago. The prelude of KA flows backwards into the maelstrom of Magma's past and future in Kontorkos, 1974. Since release in 1974, when the concept was not as hewn out of the material, the Kontorkos album material has undergone several changes, both due to configurations of the band and Christian Vander's interpretation of it evolving. In its 1974 release form, Kontorkos is a standardization of Magma's post-MDK sound and character, as it was intended to partially be an interpretation of a descent into a tomb or forgotten knowledge. Kontorkos definitely relishes its discordant and eerie sections. With each Kontorkos song taking around 15 minutes, the album as a whole takes its time and builds up its nature as a true rock-derived soul album. Musically, Kontorkos is split down the middle, past and future. The harder and metallic MDK-esque material is dedicated to the story of Kontorkos, with Kontorkos Part 1 on side 1 and Kontorkos Part 2 on side 2. The nervous and bombastic Orc alarm on side 1 foreshadows both the coming of the people of Orc and the more rhythmic humming vocals seen later on De Futura. Since both were written by Janek Top, it is likely Orc Alarm was an experimental prototype for the more complex De Futura from Udu Vudu. Coltrane Sundaya, Kobaian for Coltrane Rest in Peace, on side 2 is a piano elegy and the band's own tribute to John Coltrane. It seems to suggest the link between Kontorkos and Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré is similar to the link Vander sees in his own relationship with John Coltrane's work. As stated, the Kontorkos album unites these two, technically three, strains of Magma themes. So how does it link into the saga of the archaeologist and the pharaoh outside the name? The Kontorkos sections of the album anticipate revelation. Kontorkos must uncover the secrets Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré failed to uncover. Upon his entrance into the tomb, Kontorkos comes into contact with either Rhé's ghost or dust from his sarcophagus. In his search, Rhé was questing to awaken or embody the Egyptian god of creation, Ptah. Ptah, spelled with a P, is a mysterious figure that lingers about Magma's discography, and Christian Vander has mentioned in interviews. The god is directly linked with Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré's quest. Ptah may directly be the KREUHN, supreme being, spoken about in the time of hatred, or an elaboration on it. Both seem to embody the creative energy of the universe, but direct interpretation is often useless with Magma. Through either direct magic or the time loop of De Futura, Rhé was the first to develop and use Kobaian as a magical language to unlock the mysteries of the universe. This pharaoh was the first to embark on the mysterious path towards the Univeria Zekt. Rhé's knowledge, or spirit, passes into the prophet Kontorkos, through which it will pass into the people of Kobaia. Kontorkos' role as a conduit is not finished, as a full vision of the pharaoh's life overtakes him. Released in 2009, the album Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré is that vision of the Pharaoh's tragedy, a Greek tragedy about a man against the universe he wishes to complete. On album, Christian Vander fully morphs into the character of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, accompanied by a choir. The material plunges into Vander's interest in Egyptology, the mysteries of Egypt, and funerary rites. It depicts an ominous overwhelming of Rhé's mission and his race against death to complete it. With reprisals of segments from Udu Vudu, Attack, and Magma's live albums like Live/High, Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré can be considered a perfection on certain songs Magma was toying with for decades, divided into 4 movements, similar to Contorcal's Interior, along with Funerarium Cont and an epilogue titled Se, or maybe Sihi. The material on the album is partially re-recorded, partially a standardization, and partially new. The first half of the album is re-recordings and insertions of the material already known to be linked to the Contorcal cycle. Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré 1 opens with a heavenly announcement in Kobaian derived from the previously released Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré announcement from Live/High, and KREUHN Eastern song from Attack. It serves as an announcement akin to a prologue in music before a play begins. Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré 2 then opens with Rhé's rule and his mission to serve God, or Ta. Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré 2 is a combination of the versions of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré released on Udu Vudu, High from Live/High, and Zombies Ghost Dance from Attack. The sequence mirrors Rhé's own entrance, his glorious life, then his conflicted feelings towards death in a culture that honors it so. Throughout it, the Pharaoh seeks the universe through the embodiment of the god Ta. Ta ominously being both the god of craftsmen and known as the Lord of Eternity, who gave life to humanity through his heart and tongue. In appropriate pursuit, Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré 2 is dominated by the Pharaoh's scatting soliloquy. The second half of the album is, for the most part, new material. Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré 2 segues directly into the eeriness of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré 3. Here, against all obstacles, the Pharaoh labors towards his vision even as a conspiracy is hatched against him. The vocals allude to both Orcalarm and De Futura as the Pharaoh struggles against time itself. The sequence serves as both Rhé's invocation and a rousing against him as he reaches forward with repetitive exclamations of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré 4 is both Rhé's final rejection of death and total vow against it. Stella Vander's vocals dominate as a requiem for the dying pharaoh, who falls short of his goal. He is betrayed either by his followers, his court, or his own body, perhaps a combination of both involving some poison. Rhé glances the ultimate truth of the universe, but natural weakness drags him towards death. It concludes with a classic Magma crescendo, which becomes Funerarium Cont. This is both the Pharaoh's end and the album's conclusion. Funerarium Cont being a cognate of funeral chant or funerary cant. Death has stolen the universe from the Pharaoh, but, as shown by his droning voice, he lingers on in life in death. He waits through the aeons until the archaeologist Contorcals is pulled towards his tomb. The repetitive clash of cymbals and drums foreshadows the future of Mechanic Destructive Commando and the coming of the people of Orc. The funeral dirge concludes with the promise of Se, or Sehi. It is this promise which inspires Contorcals to take up the cosmic music and work towards the utopia of Kobaia as a prophet. For, behind this music, all is silence. His message will one day lead men to the stars and inspire the later prophet Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré against the stagnation of Earth. Has the cosmic music truly conquered death? After the completion of the Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré cycle, it was unclear what direction Magma would take. There was still plenty of miscellaneous material dating back decades waiting to be recorded, like the long-rumored Zes, but post-2009 Magma was a new era for the band. Christian Vander had noted, for example, the screaming vocals Magma had made famous were, in his words, not necessary going forward. Modern Magma was interested in using Magma's old forms for untested styles. The albums that would follow would display radical reinterpretations of Magma's identity. Felicity Toz, or Tosh, 2012, although it was probably written somewhere in 2001-2002, exhibits what may be seen as a complete overhaul of Magma in sound, but it is not as much of a total departure as it first seems. If examined on the same sliding scale as MTK, Felicity Toz represents the folk music or spiritual aspect of Zeuhl. Vander has clarified Felicity-Tos exists more for that tinkering in sound rather than filling any role in the overall Magma/Kobaian mythos. The intention in the name Felicity-Tos is that the Kobaian felicity can probably be taken as a cognate of the word felicity or similar joyous emotion. There is the usual Magma bombast, but that is inherent in the structure of Magma's music. The album is joyous and innocent, but in the form of religious ceremony. It is described as a renewal in the manner of Kobaian's healing aspect, the beauty of existence after a thunderstorm. Felicity-Tos' sound sits somewhere between melodic folk music and spiritual, but in Kobaian. Structurally, the album is one song, or movement. 28 minutes long, it is divided into multiple sections, concluding on the album's only other song, Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré sont venus. Each section is rather short, with only one going beyond 5 minutes. Overall, the music is an exploration of Earth's folk/world music in Kobaian, thus Kobaia's folk music, with some Motown influence. This shows best in the Nums and Ta sections, which resemble harmonic spiritual celebration. That segues into a piano interlude in Wortz, which sounds almost too classical for Magma. That is not to say this album is too soft. Sai is a distant echo of Magma's more militaristic material with pointed repetition on Vander's drumming. Ost, which follows it, is one of the most unique pieces of Magma material and has a sound that can only be described as a stage musical interlude, perhaps influenced by Vander's work on musicals for children. Zar, which concludes the sequence, is cryptic with occultic chanting. Then the album concludes on the chiming lullaby of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré sont venus. Felicity-Tos is a distillation of mercy offering on Vander's own work in children's music. The idea Kobaian expresses things too complicated to put into any other language. Magma's next album in 2014, UNÍἱERԻA Zekt, returned to the re-recording of old material for the band. UNÍἱERԻA Zekt is a total re-recording and reorchestration of the first half of 1001 Degrees Centigrade's, or Magma's second album. It tells the story of this one Kobaian, UNÍἱERԻA Zekt. Rare for a Magma album, the tale receives a direct explanation. UNÍἱERԻA Zekt is the name of the Kobaian who left after all the others, despite their disapproval. He thought he was better than anyone else, and he was sure he could convert Kobaia's enemies to the Kobaian spirit. But he failed and left alone for Kobaia. On the symbolic stopover planet Malaria, he has to face the raging elements he thinks he can dominate. With his ship almost sunk, he ends up begging them, to no avail. He will disappear, drowned, swept away by the frenzied elements. After the noise, silence. At dawn, only a finally calmed remains, enlightened by the soft beams of the sun in this new day. Being an alternative take on side 1 of 1001 Degrees Centigrade's, UNÍἱERԻA Zekt is largely negligible in Magma's overall corpus, but it was Vander taking a redo on early material he thought was not overall up to snuff. Magma returned to recording relatively new material with the album Slagtons in 2015. It is a massive departure from the strained Felicity-Tos. Magma wields their contemporary forms of shorter songs into their established style of jazz fusion backed by choirs, what Magma fans would consider true soul music. It is billed as a jazz metal symphony after all, with a creeping doom element reminiscent of MDK, and was developed on stage since 2019. Slagtons is a smaller album clocking in at only slightly more than 25 minutes, like Felicity-Tos. One will notice Slagtons has a mixture of both Kobaian and French, an artistic decision that harkens back to Mercy, but also foreshadows the ultimate of zes. Slagtons is after all the appetizer, and zes the main course 50 years in production. It is difficult to talk about zes as simply an album, because zes's history runs parallel to Magma's entire development. According to Vander, zes has been in drafting in one form or another since the start of Magma, so over 50 years, but a first draft only came to fruition in 1977. Prototypes of the sequence were appearing on Magma compilations by 1979, such as the Bobino concert recording in 1981, but then it vanished by 1983. Like most Magma material, it had a complex development cycle. Vander wrote a song titled Maître des Sons, Lord of Sounds, which may or may not have been a version of Da Zeuhl Wortz on an envelope, but lost it. Years later, he recovered the song, but not physically. The envelope was still lost. He was overcome with the same inspirations and rewrote the entire lost text. He described this as recovering the texts and final version of Zes. The only issue was recording it. Of all Magma material, the band has been rather open in describing what Zes is in English, French, and Kobaian. Zes means master in Kobaian, or something akin to it, but that meaning is textured. Christian Vander has compared Zes to the sound of a blade, a ceremony at the end of the universe, at the end of all time. The performance he invokes is literal in music and imagination. The event is pictured in an amphitheater at the end of the universe, before the closure of all things, when out steps the master of ceremonies from the night. A depiction of the literal end of the universe, Zes can be seen as a capstone. It bears the subtitle in French, The Day of Nothingness, but has also been described as the day eternity loses its name. In the imagination of Magma fans, Zes acquired the massive size its grandeur and mystique built up. After decades, the only thing concrete about it were attempted fragments in live performances and lofty statements, often translated from French. In July 1999, Vander attempted to address in a translated interview exactly what Zes was planned to be. No, I think there was some confusion with Zes. I mentioned one day that Zes would probably fill 5 records. At the time, 5 records was equal to about 3 hours of music, so I imagined Zes to be 3 hours long. So I probably mentioned 5 albums one day, but it wasn't about the Samtok, but rather Zes. 45 minutes is already an LP, but it's possible that I also said 5 hours instead of 5 records. Yes, Zes. I was referring to Zes. But we never talked about 9 albums. Maybe 5 albums? I probably said 5. This released version, or segment, of Zes then uses the subtitle La Jour des Néants. Vander has given an idea of what this Day of Nothing is. In the story that Zes is about, at this moment a stage has been reached in which everyone has approximately the same level of understanding of the universe. For the finale, the Masters have chosen a huge stadium somewhere in the universe, in which they stage a theatrical performance of the last day or night. The Master of Language who then speaks is at the same level of knowledge as the one who listens to him. It's just a game, a theatrical idea. Zes would finally be recorded in 2018 due to the insistence of Stella Vander, then be released in 2019. Zes, Le Jour des Néants, is apocalyptic, but in the form of absolute, if not final, revelation. Accompanied in full by the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, Zes fulfills itself in an operatic, if not Wagnerian, form. One can even find a resemblance to Antonín Dvořák's New World Symphony, with a heavy influence from North American spirituals, contemporary classical music, and even John Coltrane's philosophy played over an entire orchestra. Christian and Stella Vander's vocals dominate, but this is a performance of the entire universe. A progression into the scatting dream at the end of all time, at the end of all things. The vision of Zes is, above all, the visionary reflections of an immemorial dream haunting the most obscure part of our souls. Zes opens with the foreshadowing choir of Hom dem Sol Stadium, the hymn to nothingness, and brief booming statements in Kobaian. As is usual in Magma, it is a sort of preparation. This is the entrance to the stadium of the celestial music, the last performance, the prelude before the players take the stage. The addition of the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra adds an otherworldliness to the start. This is soul, but a form of soul so evolved, past and future melt into one within it. Tones of Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré appear as Christian Vander takes a commanding role. This is the master of language who, in this ceremony, is all things and is nothing, the absolute of the Zeuhl Wortz. In the guise of this master of language, Christian Vander delivers the band's most extensive pseudo-spoken word monologue on the second track, Da Zeuhl Wortz, the forces of the universe / the elements, and possibly it is in French. Each song on the album is billed with a French subtitle. Fulfilling the trend of Magma's modern form, Zes is rendered in a mixture of Kobaian and French. If one believes there is a literal interpretation of the Kobaian mythos, this monologue, and Zess overall, can be seen as its Rosetta Stone or cipher, as the elite extremophile pointed out in this article on Magma. A few passages need to be acknowledged from this poetic monologue, as they seal together the decades of ideas in Magma's discography and spirit. Meaning may be lost due to machine translation, but the statements are direct enough to interpret in any language, though ominously cryptic. It opens by invoking this divine master as, "In this ancient stadium, we have come for the last appointment. Today is the day when everything becomes the whole again." The theme of closure has already been invoked, but there is no regret or resistance against it. Vander defines himself in the ancient paradox of being both the master of everything and master of nothing. In this ancient stadium, all of existence is in attendance. This is the absolute fulfillment of Magma, the blade of light that tears the veil of crystal dreams beyond the doors, supreme hymn to nothingness. The silence of knells is your name, master of lava, of magma, fire that dries our tears and burns our torments. You are the universal core. Purification is your name. Can such a being survive the apocalypse, the absolute cessation of all things? This, the final outburst of heat from the cooling mass of the universe. This ideal, or identity, which is everything and nothing, is the ultimate revelation which the ceremony portends. And you, KREUHN, master of all life and death, Sol is your name. It has as many names and forms as the master of language. The universe, the KREUHN, Ta, creativity, and even Sol. Can all these things express their ends within themselves? This is why it is the day eternity loses its name. Magma is reciting an ancient paradox in its own scale. Perhaps the final revelation posed to Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, Kontorkos, the people of Kobaia, and Nabir-Gutat was this: can there be an end to something which has no end? This is what the ceremony of Zess has come to celebrate. As the players proclaim, in this ancient stage begins the end of the ends, the chaos of apocalypse, where everything returns to nothingness. In this ancient stage begins the night of the worlds. Eternity has lost its name. Today is the day we will die, and I say thank you. Without dissonance, the French of Da Zeuhl Wortz perfectly moves into the honorable Kobaian of Die Hoorderspracher, the voice that speaks. The master of language continues to speak out towards the end of the universe in a language of pure emotion, Kobaian. Here it is lyrical. Magma's classical scatting and exclamations return with the progress of the orchestra. The pianos begin to bend towards the revelation. This is the voice that speaks as the final rendition of the universe. It concludes the measure on a heavy sting. The music and exhilaration heighten in Strand und Schwen, beyond bridge. It seems even Kobaian fails to describe these final events as impulsive scatting and repetition take over. The orchestra is what makes this track. The strings showcase the grand sweep which attempt to cover all that has been. The translation of beyond bridge, or beyond the bridge, is very apt for it. The entire section establishes a parallel to Kobaian as a language. This is the universe speaking back through the celestial music. There is no need for human intervention here. The Magma stings and shouts only serve to underlie and focus on the orchestra's depth. The vocals of Zess Manter Kontum, the master's chant, then provide a punctuation and reply to Strem unden Svem, though the title in translated Kobaian might be more akin to Master's Night / the Chant of Nothing. Here there is experimentation with the entire scale of sound. The closure of the universe becomes tangible against it, the nightingale's song against the final night. There are desperate strikes, but it transforms into the ultimate duet between the feminine and masculine, Stella and Christian Vander. Both are necessary to fulfill the universe. The horns turn the segment into a sort of platonic embrace. A choir resumes which echoes throughout the universe beneath a solo. That is until the discordant strain of the ceremony fills the final movements of the universe with parallel voices. All that is human and material has been emptied in preparation for total nothingness. Sie is was stem is godly, both figuratively and literally. Sie is was stem is both the requiem of Zess, and thus the requiem of the universe. The song moves into a quicker speed distinct from the rest of the album. In Kobaian, the angelic choirs declaim Sanctus and Jesus Christus, Sacred and Jesus Christ, in Kobaian. The ceremony has moved beyond the material universe to the spiritual universe. The play here takes the form of a Gothic cathedral. It seems, in the final minutes of existence, the KREUHN, or soul itself, has entered the ceremony. Throughout it, there's the sting of Christian Vander's voice, which swings between a singing monologue in Kobaian and booming scatting. After 2 minutes and 10 seconds, though, the song crashes down into a sharp voice that declares an alert warning, the same as it did in Orc Alarm in De Futura. The curtain is being drawn on both this performance and the universe. In the last seconds, the master of language cries to the falling heavens in that dream language, Kobaia! Then peace overcomes all in the form of Domgel Blau. The conclusion of Zes is a celestial soliloquy punctuated by brief refrains from the choir. In structure, it is rather minimalist compared to the rest of the album, as it rests mostly on piano with highlights from the horns and strings. It pales in comparison to Sie ist verstimmt, but it has a different purpose. This is the last fantasy, or fantasia, before sleep, the closing bow of the apocalypse. The repetition of Om, perhaps invoking the Dharma concept, harmonizes everything and nothing. This is where eternity has lost its name. The final cooling of all creativity into an absolute form, the conclusion of a theatrical idea. Thus closes Zes and the universe of Kobaia. There are still a few loose oddities, notes, and pseudo-bootlegs to remark upon before drawing the curtain closed on the opera of Magma. Their work over the years has produced no end of loose threads and half-formed concepts. There's an entire undercurrent to Magma of unformed songs, as it were. Besides the early renditions of established songs, not much can be said about this material because it is akin to looking into the band's notebook, but most of these songs/albums are halfway unfinished or halfway finished in a manner. They may emerge one day fully fleshed out. To talk about an actual released album, though, The Unnamables, 1972, is a soul album by an alternate formation of Magma, performing under the name Univeria Zekt. The album was intended as a secret, popular appeal album and an intro to Magma, but does not directly use Kobaian or the Magma mythos, outside the obvious hat-tip name, basically being a split album with the second half dedicated to Vander's own material. It is a good introduction to Magma for the uninitiated, as the head of Magma worked on it, but it falls into the area between Magma and Offering, so most hardcore fans probably won't care for it. Live/High, 1975, has already been mentioned in relation to the Contorco cycle. It features rearrangements like Koba, a rearrangement of Kobaia, rarer unrevised material, and sections which were worked into Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré. The track Lins, for example, has never resurfaced outside occasional live performances. Live/High is Magma's first official live album, which makes it an important point in how Magma did and still does develop their sound. Inédit, 1974, or Inedits, is the extreme of scattered drafts. The title Inédit means unpublished in French. The album is a mess of mysterious tracks that would partially resurface on KA, Contorco-Centuria, while writing credits show it being split between Vander and Janek Top. The menagerie of titles tell how rough many of these tracks were/are in concept, but some did, and more likely will, re-emerge at some point. I'm not going to try to pronounce any of those titles. This album exists for those who feel compelled to dig into the depths of Magma. There are also a stream of official, unofficial, and semi-official Magma bootlegs. The most famous of these are the AKT, AKT, label live concert albums. These are too numerous, too diverse, and too vast to totally cover here, but they often feature the early material of what would later become albums like Ëmëhntëhtt-Ré, and even an early dramatic rendition of Zes. They showcase how Magma tests material live, then refines it from there. For a person listening in retrospect, they can develop an appreciation for the contrast. If someone ever wants to craft a total genealogy to Magma's songs, the AKT releases should be a major element in that analysis. The Myths and Legends DVDs/albums are similar, but include produced video footage, being live concerts often interspersed with interviews and retrospectives on the band. All deliver a more visceral image of the Magma sequences. Where does Magma end? Well, in a place beyond time and space that awaits us, but also right here. Christian Vander has stated before he does not understand where the controlling, wrathful image of him, and thus Magma, comes from. Magma is as much Stella Vander as it is Christian Vander. It is as much the flowing of the band's pure concept as it is those two. They are, after all, the Zeuhl Wortz Mechanik, the musicians singing celestial music. Magma is always different to each individual listener, though. Kobaian is both the alien and the human. The Zeuhl Wortz creates a sound both familiar and different. Maybe the seeds of Magma were an ecological concern in John Coltrane, but disparate ideas often cohere better together. This video is an attempt to do the Zeuhl Wortz justice through these ears. Whether it be a story of Earth, or Kobaia, now or 1,000 years from now, about mechanical life forms from beyond the stars, or an Egyptian pharaoh from the dawn of history, the Kobaian mythology is a tale. Through musical structure, it has weaved a very new and very old story. Magma has no desire to embody rage, militarism, or strife alone. It does acknowledge those things, but it embraces the fullness of life beyond them. Zeuhl is the cosmic music, the music that embodies the experiences of the universe. Creation, happiness, sadness, failure, overcoming, and, most of all, conclusion. The beauty of attempting to give an absolute idea form, which almost resembles a classical concerto. Magma is about striving. The spirituality of striving bookends the story of Magma. Vander concludes on what the motivation of singing in an alien language is. Kobaian, the language, is meant to eliminate ambiguities in human expression, the oppositions which divide humanity. My message is a positive one. Life, the striving towards the light. Fu zemen dros sun sein gel som mini vamme. Sundaya ses.